Welcome back. So everything works now with the conventions, but here's a problem. Let's say by mistake I rename this guy to being something different than genre ID. Let's rename it into genre ent ID like this. It actually seems like everything will still run, but we'll get a problem because the genre name right here needs to match the genre ID for the convention to work. So in this case, since it's not called genre ID, but genre ent ID, the entity framework would be able to actually join them together and say, this must be the foreign key for the genre, because it can't kind of figure out that this genre matches this genre ID right here. Now, according to the naming convention, you're not allowed to call your ID, the foreign key ID right here, must be a good valid name. That means that you cannot just call anything you want right now. You cannot call the foreign key genre ent ID. Then the entity framework wouldn't find out that these two are related in any way, because it will take the name right here and it'll look for an ID, an integer value that has the same name and then ID in the end. And in this case, it wouldn't find it because it's called ent ID instead of genre ID. One thing you would be able to do is if you called it genre entity ID, I actually think it would work because they would take the class name and it would just say, okay, it has the class name ID, so that must be the foreign key. But if you don't have any of those two ways to do it, it'll fail right here. And let me prove it. Let me rerun the code to show you a new SQL query when we are creating the table actually. And I'll prove to you that this is not the best thing that could happen right here. So when we scroll down right here, scroll up actually, you'll see something weird happens. It actually adds the genre entity ID, ent ID right here that we just created, but it's not actually the foreign key. Then it also adds a real foreign key right here. Now this is the one that the entity framework will generate automatically if you don't define one. It'll just define this one automatically if it doesn't find one that matches the naming conventions. So now it has this one in the database that it uses as the foreign key, but we don't have access for that one anymore. So that's a real problem. We can't reach that one from code. So if you use the naming conventions, it's extremely important that you use the right names right here. So if you call this genre, you have to use the genre ID right here. So let's refactor, rename, and there we go. Let's call it back to genre ID. And now it will know they relate. And when I restart the database, it'll pretty much just point to that one in the genre ID instead of actually going and pointing to a wrong new entity that doesn't even exist in the database. So there we go. Now it has only genre ID again, and that's actually this one right here, so we can access it again from code. So how do we fix this? Well, if we don't want to depend on the conventions, Microsoft also built something called the Fluent API. We're already using some of it. Now we can actually go into the Fluent API and start defining exactly how the relations between our tables should look, and you should use that. So I'm going to show you that in the next lesson. See you next time. Bye.